All right, Rabbi, we'll say good morning. Let us begin. It's a great schos in Meretz Hashem to resume our learning in Tzidkas Hatzaddik, Reb Tzaddik's Torah, Reb Tzaddik of Lublin. If anyone needs, I know I just announced I sent it out on the chat, but I made physical copies as well. So there's sheets right by Moshe as well. Although I will tell you also, it's a good investment and addition to your library. If you're looking to grow your library, the edition that we're using is the Oz V'Hadar 2-volume Tzidkas Hatzaddik, which has, as you've seen, the beautiful Perushim of the Be'uriah Chasidus on it, which makes the learning of this sometimes complicated sefer a little bit easier. So with that, we're skipping a little bit, and we're going to pick up today at Os Nun Hey. Os Nun Hey, Os 55. So I will say this is really quite beautiful. Let's actually begin looking at it in the Be'uriah Chasidus. So if you take a look again, it's page Kuf Lamed Beis, Os Nun Hey, the Be'uriah Chasidus, the right-hand side. So the Rebbe writes as follows: Mi'achar shekol chata Yisrael enum nobim mi'etzem nafsham. So we'll say he quotes over here that which we learned. It feels like a very, very, very long time ago, back in Os Nun Beis, where the Rebbe developed this beautiful idea that the essence of a Jew is tov. Right? The essence of the individual is good. And by definition, again, although I may perform many negative actions, many misdeeds, many HaAtzeres, at my core, I am good. At my core, I'm good. The etzem nafsham of a Jew is good, which therefore by definition means that whenever I sin doesn't emanate from my essence, but rather sin is something that occurs because of some other variety of circumstances. And this is incredibly important because, again, what the Rebbe is really highlighting is we all make mistakes, but those mistakes are not reflective of my inner core. My inner core is good, my inner core is beautiful, my inner core is spiritually intact. Those mistakes are a result of a variety of other things. Those are the other things we're going to try to analyze a little bit in this particular os. So the Rebbe says, so if that's the case, that my essence is good, and therefore chet, sin, does not come me'etzem nafsham, does not come from the essence of who I am. Where does it come from? Memela bar adavar. Therefore, the Rebbe says it's clear. Ki im lo haya ish Yisrael shocheach es tzivoy Hashem yisparach lo haya shayich sheyech la'olam. Listen, this is beautiful. The Rebbe says, so why do we sin? Why do we sin? We sin because we forget the Ribono Shel Olam. That's, if you want to know the dynamic, how sin occurs. Because also think about this, it's a little bit of a steer, it's a little bit of a contradiction. On one hand, if you're going to tell me that the etzem nafsham, that the essence of the Jew is good, right? If that's what you're going to know, the essence of the Jew is good, then by definition, how does sin occur? To which the Rebbe says, sin occurs when we forget about the Ribono Shel Olam. Well, so I just want to point out, even before we explain this in further depth, you understand, of course, that the opening line of the Shulchan Aruch is Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid. I place Hashem before me at all times. And the Baal Tanya, in the opening chapter of Tanya, says, why is it that the Shulchan Aruch decides to go ahead and start out this way, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid? Because he posits, which is really what the Mechaber is saying as well, that the most important ingredient for spiritual success is God awareness. God awareness, to have an awareness of the Ribono Shel Olam. So you look at the first Mishnah Berurah, right? The Mishnah Berurah explains this in such beautiful detail. He says, "Ina doma," you can't compare a person who lives in the constant presence of a king versus someone who knows there's a king but doesn't feel that he's living within his proximity. Two different dynamics. Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid, God awareness. Because when I remember that I'm in the presence of the Ribono Shel Olam, that shapes my behavior. Masha'inkin Reb Tzaddik says, and this is incredible, when does sin occur? When does chet occur? It's not about say, I don't sin because I'm a bad person. We're good people. People are good. People in their essence are good. But so how do I commit HaAtzeres? I forget about the Ribono Shel Olam. Shichacha. I forget that there's a Ribono Shel Olam. V'im imkein, Rabbi said, this is incredible. V'im kein, Ikar ha'averos shall call ish Yisrael bo'im v'yotzim el ha'poel rak machmas ha'shichacha sheshochiach es chumras hadavar. So we'll say, how does sin occur? The Rebbe writes, shichacha, forgetfulness. Now we're going to see forgetfulness manifests itself in a couple of different ways. extreme forgetfulness could be that I forget about the Ribbon Shalom. I just forget about God. Everyone say, not that I forget about God and I'm worshiping Avodah Zarah Chas v'Shalom, but sometimes I just have a lapse of my God awareness. Other times, I remember God, but I forget what the Rebbe calls Chumras Hadavar. I forget maybe how bad Chet is and how much Chet should be avoided. V'zeh mipnei, this is beautiful. Shemakor hazechira v'ashichacha hu b'leiv. So the Rebbe says the essence of memory and by extension forgetfulness is found in the heart. Kidi isa v'megillah shepirshu chazal lo sishkach harei shichachas halev amr. So it goes to what's Gemara Maseches Megillah that's commenting on the obligation to remember Amalek. Right? So the Torah says Zachar es asher salacha Amalek b'derech b'sem l'tzayim. Remember, and then the Torah ends off by saying lo sishkach, don't forget. And the Gemara there darshans, what does it mean? Don't forget. Harei shichachas halev amr. It means don't forget in your heart. Don't forget. So the Rebbe says, therefore, when we speak about shichacha, forgetfulness, so both forgetfulness and memory are rooted in the heart. Left hand column, page Kuf Lamed Beis Be'urei Chasidus. Shafilu imitachein shezocher ha'adam b'moach es chumras tzivoy Hashem yisparach b'shar she'over al avera. Because even if you say that a person will remember in his mind, right? Let's say in the mind, intellectually, I remember the importance of the mitzvahs and the importance of not transgressing averos. Mikol makom evadai she'eno zocher zos az balev. Well, so this is incredible. The Rebbe says, chances are, if you remember something in your mind, you don't remember it in your heart. We'll explain this with you in just a moment. And furthermore, ki b'teva ish kol Yisrael, because the teva, the nature of people are, ilu haya be'emes zocher gam b'hargashas halev, shachin Hashem yisbarach tziva al ma'aseh zeh lo sasekein, u'memela haya margish b'libo ba'osa is ad kama chomer lavor al tzivuyov, so we'll say this is incredible. Rav Tzaddik says there are two ways that a person can know something. A person can know something intellectually, and a person can know something emotionally. Rav Tzaddik says, what's the difference? What's the chiluk? What's the chiluk between knowing something intellectually, knowing something emotionally? This is so incredible. Only a Rebbe could say this. So the Rebbe says something. He says, here's the difference. You can know something intellectually and totally ignore it. I can know it, yet forget it. Really not focus on it. Things you know emotionally inform the way you live. Things you know emotionally, at the end of the day, you don't forget. Rabbi say, you hear this incredible yesod, and I think it's so true. There's so many things I know intellectually, but lav dafka that I actually follow through on them. In other words, I can know something to be intellectually true, and I could totally ignore it in the way that I live my life. I know that I should treat my wife intellectually. I know that I should spend more time here. I know that I know all of these things. It's not a machlokes, it's not a shayla, it's not a suffix. I know it, but lav dafka that I act on it. Because when you know something in the moach, it's easy to go ahead and simply dispense with it. But when you know something in the leiv, when you know something in your heart, when you know something in your emotions, that informs the way you live, and that cannot be ignored. And therefore, says the Rebbe something absolutely amazing. Sometimes when we get ourselves into spiritual trouble, and we commit averos, and we ignore the Ratzon Hashem, that's sometimes because, although I may be intellectually aware, I have emotionally forgotten. And I will say there is this, the Rebbe is developing, first of all, is this dynamic that I could be suffering from non-complete or non-full forgetfulness. I can remember something in my moach, but if it's not in my leiv, it is easy to live life in a state of forgetfulness. Incredible. Efshar klal shehaya b'chol zos oses ha'avera. Anyways, we'll have to stop over here. We'll pick up here tomorrow, Meretz Hashem. But the Rebbe has introduced us really to two dramatic ideas. Number one, that chet is the result of forgetfulness. That's number one. Avera only happens in a state of forgetfulness. That's Aleph. Beis, there are two seats of knowledge. my heart and my mind. It is easy, however, to live life with intellectual awareness, but yet that doesn't necessarily inform the way you live. In order ultimately, again, for my awareness to shape the way I live and what I do, it must not just be simply known in the mind, but it must be also known in the heart. All right, so we'll stop. We'll Hashem, continue with this idea tomorrow. Shkoyach. All right, Shabbat, say good morning. Let us begin another beautiful daf of Maseches Yoma in front of us. We'll begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Yona Shushie Ehrenfeld, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drushos this month in memory of Yona's grandfather, Yosef ben Shmuel Aron, Zichron Livracha. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Jack Bennett, in memory of Sergeant Nikolai Rappaport of the Givati Brigade, who was killed in Lebanon in a Hezbollah ambush on February 7th, 1998. Our Day of Learning sponsors, Seth and Rachel Rotenberg, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Seth's sister Naomi Tova Bas Ze'ev, and in honor of Seth's completion of the Daf Yomi cycle. I think I saw Seth walk in here before. Right, Seth, Mazel Tov, and your sisters, nishmas should have an aliyah. Incredibly beautiful. And our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Bobby and Lisi Lilienfeld, in honor of the yahrzeit of Bobby's mother, Madeline Lilienfeld, Migdal Bas Velvel Zichron Livracha. We hope then in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, all of the families in Nechama and Halavai. We should all be zocheh to continue on our path of spiritual accomplishment in Mirat Hashem for many years to come. So we also take the opportunity to, of course, recognize that today is also the day in which Yom Hazikaron is observed, in which not just Eretz Yisrael but Am Yisrael honors those who have fallen defending the state of Israel, those who have fallen to as victims of terror. And it's so important that we always recognize Va'amar lach b'damai chayi, va'amar lach b'damai chayi, that we exist and we reap the benefits of so much because of the incredible and overwhelming sacrifice. If you follow the news in Eretz Yisrael and you see the commemorations and you hear the heartbreaking speeches and you realize that literally ein bayis asher ein sham nes. We think about these days of Yom Hazikaron, Yom HaAtzeres, for us, they're like a little bit more esoteric and detached. But when you live in such a small country, you realize that there is not a family that is not touched by these remembrances. There's not a family who has not lost someone or doesn't know someone who has lost someone. And we reap the benefits. For us, we're just waiting for the airport to reopen. So Mirat Hashem, we could go and we could enjoy and we could just taste the beauty of Eretz Yisrael. But it's so important to realize that gift comes as the result of so much overwhelming and heartbreaking mesiras nefesh. So take a few moments to daven for those neshamas who have left this world al kiddush Hashem, daven that their families should Mirat Hashem be able somehow to experience some type of nechama, and halavai we should all be zocheh Mirat Hashem to go home. Bekarav biyamenu. All right, Tabose, with that, let us begin. So today's daf is daf Gimel. We are picking up on daf Beis Amud Beis. Okay, I lost my bookmark, but that's all right. That's all right. Good. Satan works in many ways. Good. Not going to get distracted. Well, I am going to get distracted, but okay, good. So let's. I'm fine. No. I don't even want it. I don't want it. I can't use it if it's not my own. No, okay. Thank you. Fine. I'll use it. All right. So today's daf is daf Gimel. Thank you. So we are picking up Mirat Hashem on Beis Amud Beis, and we are picking up. I believe we left off Ve'ima Shemini, which is 2, 4, 6 lines up from the bottom. So we'll say, so remember again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit. The Mishnah introduced us to the concept that the Kohen Gadol is sequestered for 7 days prior to the Avodah of Yom Kippur. The Gemara then went on to explain that, by the way, it's not just on Yom Kippur, but in fact, we find a very similar process by Para Aduma. Kohen is sequestered for 7 days prior to the Avodah of Para Aduma as well. Where do we learn that out from? So the Gemara explained that it comes from the pasuk by miluim. Remember again the paradigmatic example of hafrasha. The paradigmatic example of sequestering is by the miluim. Ultimately, again, by the 8 days or the 7 days of preparation for the inauguration on day number 8. By the miluim, the pasuk says, "Kasher asa bayom hazet tziva Hashem lasos lechaper aleichem." So, if you remember again, we had two different ideas in the Gemara yesterday. One of them was lasos refers to para aduma, lechaper refers to Yom Kippur. Other possibilities that we learn out from the Gzeir Shava of tziva. Okay, two different opinions. The Gemara now, then, I'm just sorry to give you a little bit of a background. The Gemara then goes, so I will never finish the daf, but the Gemara goes ahead and explains that perhaps the pasuk is coming to include something else. How do you know? Now, both remember, the fact that the pasuk includes Yom Kippur, I understand that comes from lechaper, right? I understand, kapara makes sense. But how do you know that lasos refers to para aduma? Maybe lasos refers to a whole variety of other different things. So we're going through that process now. So the last piece we ended up yesterday is that maybe the pasuk is coming to teach me that there's an obligation of sequestering prior to the Kohen doing the avoda on Yom Tov, one of the regalim. To which the Gemara now says maybe ve'ema Shemini, maybe ultimately again it's referring to Shemini HaAtzeres, and maybe the halach is that before the Kohen does the avoda on Shemini HaAtzeres, there's an obligation of sequestering for 7 days. After all, depreciates shiva yom echad. That follows the paradigm of the miluim of the inauguration, because we'll say, what was the miluim? 7 days of sequestering for 1 day of work. So too again, Shemini HaAtzeres is 7 days of sequestering for 1 day of Yom Tov. To which the Gemara says, "Donin davar she'in kedusha lefanov midavar she'in kedusha lefanov, vein donin davar she'esh kedusha lefanov midavar she'in kedusha lefanov." To which the Gemara says, no, because we want to learn out something that doesn't have a period of holiness before it from something which doesn't have a period of holiness before it. As both say, the miluim, the first 7 days are not kodesh, the 8th day was. So too we assume the paradigm extends to that same type of model. That would exclude Shemini HaAtzeres. Why does it exclude Shemini HaAtzeres? Because we'll say, what does Shemini HaAtzeres come on the heels of 7 days of Yom Tov, Sukkos. So there's 7 days of Kedusha before that. So that doesn't really fit the paradigm. So we'll say the good part about this is what's informing and shaping this entire discussion is the paradigm of Miluim. Miluim, the inauguration of the Mishkan, is the paradigm for Hafrasha, is the paradigm ultimately for sequestering. So just like that took place, 7 days of quote-unquote chol, followed by an 8th day of dynamic spiritual activity. Therefore, that excludes Shemini HaAtzeres. So 1 second. I could flip it on a second. Hashta davar she'en kedusha lefanav baye prisha, davar she'esh kedusha lefanav lo kol shekain. I can make a kavachomer if a period of, we'll call it non-consecrated time, requires kedusha, then certainly requires hafrasha, requires sequestering, then certainly a day which comes on the heels of 7 days of kedusha should certainly require sequestering. So Shemini HaAtzeres should certainly require it. To which the Gemara says, no. Amar B'shar Shia, lo. It's always a great answer. B'shar says, no, incorrect. Why? Because we both say hazeh ksiv. Because we both say the pasuk by miluim that we keep on referencing says, kasher asa bayom hazeh tziva Hashem lasos lechaper aleichem, as was done on this day. So the Gemara says, hazeh teaches me kazeh, that any time there is an obligation of sequestering, it always follows the paradigm of miluim. If you take a look at Rashi, last Rashi in the daf, kazeh lo hizrich pisha ela ledugmaso. Ultimately, again, I will say it only goes ahead and it only goes. So it's not just the pshat that we're learning out the concept of hafrasha, of sequestering from miluim, but miluim becomes the paradigmatic example. And only if something looks like miluim is there an obligation of hafrasha. So once again, Shemini HaAtzeres doesn't look like miluim. Why doesn't Shemini HaAtzeres look like miluim? Why not? Because again, Shemini HaAtzeres comes on the heels of 7 prior days of Kedusha. That's not like Miluim. Miluim occurred, yes, after 7 days of preparation, but they were quote-unquote chol. They were non-consecrated days. To which the Rav Ashi Amar, mi'ika midi di'ika regalo by prisha, tafel di day by prisha. Rav Ashi says, by the way, there's another problem. Does it even make sense to say that the primary Yom Tov of Sukkot won't require prisha, won't require sequestering, but Shemini HaAtzeres? Well, Rav Ashi posits that Shemini HaAtzeres is the secondary regal. right? It's a secondary regal. It's not the primary regal. So does it make sense to say that the secondary regal of Shemini Atzeres will require Prisha, but the primary regal, i.e. Sukkis, won't? It doesn't make sense. And even if you hold, according to the opinion, this is great, that Shemini Atzeres is a regal b'fnei atzmo. It's a Yom Tov unto itself. It's its own. It's not a subsidiary of Sukkis, but rather, again, it's actually a separate, independent Yom Tov. Listen to this. Hani Mili, this is great. Le'inyan pizar kishav. Everyone knows Shemini Atzeres is only a regal b'fnei atzmo in 6 ways. In 6 ways, namely pizar kishav. I will say this is great. What's pizar kishav? Take a quick look at Rashi. Let's just take a look at this. The pay is pious. So they would go ahead and draw a separate lot for who was going to do the avoda on Shemini Atzeres. Zayin is zman, that we recite Shechem on Shemini Atzeres. Reish is regal bifnei atzmo. It's not called Sukkis. It's called Shemini Atzeres. Ultimately, again, Kuf is carbon. It has its own unique carbon. Shin is shear. It has its own unique shear, different shear of the Levium, different than Sukkis. And Beis is bracha. So if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says bracha liatzmo, bracha shayim mevarchin letfilas chaye hamelech. Interestingly enough, on Shemini Atzeres, they would recite a special bracha for the king. So the Gemara says, when we say that Shemini Atzeres is its own unique Yom Tov, it's its own unique Yom Tov in these ways, in Pizar Keshav. Aval le'in tashlumin derishon. But I will say, but halacha l'maisa, if you did not go ahead and, let's say, offer up your proper sacrificial offerings on Sukkis, you could actually do it through when? Through Shemini Atzeres. Which tells you that what? That as much as Shemini Atzeres is a regal b'fnei atzmo, it is its own unique Yom Tov, but in certain ways it is still subsidiary and tethered to the Yom Tov of Sukkot. So we'll say, I'll give you another example of this. Actually, let's just read this, because we learn, Mishalo Chag b'Yom Tov Arishon Shal Chag, Chogig v'holech kol haregel kulo. If you did not offer up your carbon chagiga, right? If you did not offer up your shalmi chagiga on Sukkis, you can go ahead and make it up through Shemini Atzeres, which tells us that as much as Shemini Atzeres is a regal bifnei atzmo in terms of pizar kishav, in these 6 ways, it really is still attached and tethered, and to a certain degree, secondary to the Sukkot. So I'll tell you also how this comes up, just in a very contemporary way. So Shlomo Zalman discusses this idea. What happens if on Shemini Atzeres, instead of saying Shemini Atzeres in Shemini Chag HaAtzeres Hazeh in Shmona Esrei, I say Sukkis. Do I have to repeat Shmona Esrei? So let me ask you this: if on Shemini Atzeres, instead of saying Shemini Atzeres, you say Chag HaMatzos Hazeh, do you have to repeat Shmona Esrei? Absolutely, right? What if you say Chag HaSukkos Hazeh instead of Shemini Atzeres? Do you have to repeat? So Shlomo Zalman says no. Now, both say the fact that you don't have to repeat tells me what? That as much as Shemini Atzeres is a regal b'fnei atzmo, le'inyan pizar kishav, it's still at its core, at its essence, on some level, it's still part of Sukkos. Okay, good. So therefore, the Gemara therefore says it can't be that Shemini Atzeres would have a concept of hafrasha. So the Gemara goes right there. Ve'ima Atzeres deprisha shiva li'omecharu. So maybe, okay. So we'll say, remember again, we're back to the drawing board. We're just trying to figure out. In the pasuk of Miluim, the pasuk of Miluim is telling us that just like Miluim, just like the inauguration had 7 days of sequestering for 1 day of service, so too there are other examples of this. So Lachaper, again, refers to Yom Kippur. Lasos, the Gemara posited, referred to Para Aduma, but the Gemara is saying, I don't know, Lasos is a very nondescript term, so maybe it refers to this. So we're just trying to go through the list of other possibilities in which the din of Hafrasha could apply. So for example, what about Atzeres? What about Shavuos? I will say Shavuos actually works. Why? Deprishas shivas yamim liyom echaru. Shavuos is 1 day, so maybe there's a din of 7 days of sequestering prior to the 1 day of Shavuos. Rabbi Abba, this is very interesting. Done in par echad va'ayil echad mi par echad va'ayil echad the lafuki atzeres dishne elim ninhu. I will say the problem is after we just got finished saying that the word kazeh or hazeh tells you that in order to be subject to a sequestering obligation, you must resemble the Miluim. Well, in the Miluim, the sacrificial order of the Miluim, Rabbi say, was 1 par and 1 ayil, right? 1 bull and 1 ram. Shavuos doesn't have those karbanos. Shavuos actually has 2 rams. So now, interesting, Yom Kippur does have one bull and one ram, but Shavuos does not. So that's a pretty good reason to indicate to us that Shavuos therefore does not have the hafrasha requirement. So that makes sense according to the opinion who says that on Yom Kippur you only offer up one ram. But according to the opinion who says that halacha l'maisa Yom Kippur has two rams, so then Yom Kippur is not comparable to Miluim as well. The Sanya Rebbe Omer Rebbe says Ayil Echad Hua Amar Kan Hua Amar B'Chumash HaPikudim. So we'll say, interestingly enough, the sacrificial order of Yom Kippur is mentioned in two places. So the Gemara says the Rebbe holds that it's the same ayil. Even though it mentions the ayil in two different places, it's the same ram. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Shnei Elim Heim. It's actually two rams. Echad ha'amar kan, one said over here, and ultimately again Echad ha'amar b'chumash hapikudim, and one mentioned in Bamidbar. Shabbos say, so if that's the case that it's two rams, then 1 second. Now forget about Shavuos. Who's to say that Yom Kippur could even be learned out from the Miluim, that it has a sequestering obligation, if the sacrificial service of Yom Kippur does not resemble the Miluim? To which the Gemara says no. Even according to Rabbi Eliezer Shimon, who holds that Yom Kippur has two rams, it's still comparable to the Miluim. Why? Hasam chad lechovas hayom v'chad lemusafin. Both say by Yom Kippur, even if you hold that there are two rams, one was for the sacrifice of the day, and one was for the karban musaf. La fuki HaAtzeres, this comes to exclude HaAtzeres, ditarvaihu chovas hayom ninhu. Where both rams ultimately again were the obligatory offering of the day, which makes it separate and distinct from the miluim, and therefore cannot be learned out from the miluim for a sequestering obligation. Good. The Emo Rosh Hashanah. So we'll say maybe Rosh Hashanah. So again, I will say we're just trying to figure out. You're telling me again that miluim is the paradigm for sequestering prior to avoda. Lasos lechaper. Lechaper teaches me Yom Kippur. Lasos is open to teach me something else. Maybe he's coming to teach me Rosh Hashanah, that before the kohen does the avodah on Rosh Hashanah, you need 7 days of sequestering. And the paradigm actually works here as well. Ve'im Rosh Hashanah, the prisha shiva liyom echadu. Rosh Hashanah is 1 day. Remember, the fact that we practically celebrate Rosh Hashanah for 2 days, that's a calendrical issue, right? Even in Eretz Yisrael. But Lamaisa, Rosh Hashanah as a Yom Tov is 1 day. So why maybe Lasos comes to teach you Rosh Hashanah and tells you that before the avodah of Rosh Hashanah, you need 7 days of sequestering for 1 day of service. Rabbi Avo, listen to this. Donin par ve'ayil shalo, mi par ve'ayil shalo. It will say, we learn out in the Miluim, not only did the Kohen, in this case the Kohen Gadol, not only did the Kohen Gadol go ahead and offer up a par and an ayil, but the par and the ayil were his. In other words, the sacrifices actually came from Aaron's own pocket. He paid for the par and the ayil. So the Gemara says, in order to be true to the paradigm of Miluim, you need a couple of criteria. Number one is that it has to be 7 days of prep, quote unquote, 7 days of sequestering for 1 day of service. Okay, so Rosh Hashanah meets that criteria as well. But number two is it has to have a par and an ayil. Good, so far so good. Rosh Hashanah meets that as well. Number three, now the Gemara introduces, by Miluim, Aaron paid out of his own pocket for the par and the ayil. So too, again, the only other Yom Tov which could be included, or other day would be a day, not only will you bring a par and an ayil, but you bring a par and an ayil from your own pocket. So say, take a look at Rashi, last Rashi, done in par shalo. Rashi says, the Miluim mishalohu. From the Miluim, also is very interesting, Aaron paid for the par and the ayil out of his own pocket. The Rashi says, "Dichsiv kach lecha egel." The pasuk says "kach lecha," and interesting. I was going to get into this discussion. The Gemara says that lecha means you have to pay for it. You have to pay for it. Ubi Yom Kippurim nami ika par va'ayil mishalo bezos yavo Aaron al kodesh bepar ben bakar lafuki HaAtzeres Rosh Hashanah titzibur ninu. Sefer Bosai, the Gemara wants to suggest if you look at Miluim and you look at Yom Kippur. Interestingly enough, the sacrifices not only come from the Kohen Gadol, but they come out of his own pocket. Therefore, again, perhaps the only time you have a din of sequestering is, again, 7 days for 1 day. That's one. Number two, par and ayil. And number three, mishalah comes out of his pocket. But by Rosh Hashanah, and by extension, Rashi throws in here Shavuos, they're karbanos sibur. that ultimately, again, the karbanos come not from the Kohen's pocket, but ultimately, again, from the tzibor, to which the Gemara says, Lapuke HaAtzeres Rosh Hashanah, the tzibor ninu. So this works according to the opinion that says, say thank you so much. I'm going to be good for the rest of the day now. So the Gemara says, so we'll say that works well according to the opinion who says that whenever the Torah says, kach lecha, take for you means really take from your own funds. Mishalcha, amad beis, va'asei lecha, and whenever the Torah says, asei lecha, make for you, that also means mishalcha. So we'll say this is very interesting because we find this type of verbiage in the Torah. For example, Rashi quotes by the Chatzotros, right? When HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu to fashion the trumpets. So the Torah says, asei lecha, so kach lecha. So there's an opinion that holds that whenever you find that lashon, what that's saying is, not only should you do it, but you need to pay for it. You need to pay for it. I will say, but there's another opinion. And the other opinion holds that halacha l'maisa, no. Kach lecha and asei lecha means you have to do it, you have to choreograph it, but the money comes from the tzibor. So ultimately, and I will say, if that's the case, then even by the miluim, by the inauguration, by the paradigmatic example, it's true. Aaron's going to bring a par and Aaron's going to bring an ayil, but it's not from his own money, it's from the tzibor. To which the Gemara says, Desanya, kach lecha mishalcha, va'asei lecha mishalcha. When the Torah says, take for you, and when the Torah says, that means mishalcha, that means from your own money. Asei lecha, make for yourself, mishalcha, that means from your own money. V'yekchu eilecha, when the Torah uses a lashon of they shall bring to you or they shall take for you, ultimately again, mishal tzibor. That refers from communal money. Dear Rabbi Yoshia. So we'll say, Rabbi Yoshia is of the opinion that we distinguish between these lashonos. Kach lecha, asei lecha, means you pay for it yourself. Right? V'yikchu eilecha, they will bring to you, ultimately again means v'yikchu eilecha, means from tzibor money, which I will say is something so fascinating. I think on this for just a moment, right? So the Rabbi Yoshia is saying that thing on this, that Aaron HaKohen on the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan has to pay for his own karbanos. Right? Isn't this incredible? We'll say, by the way, what's also the chiddush? So you say, okay, maybe it was a money issue. Was it a money issue? No. Remember again, Moshe Rabbeinu has to put out the call to Klal Yisrael to say what? To say what? Stop bringing. Stop bringing. Stop bringing. So we'll say, so what's the pshat? Right? Moshe Rabbeinu has to pay for the trumpets? He has to pay for the trumpets? Right? What are you talking about? The Moshe Rabbeinu is Kulo Klal Yisrael. He doesn't have a corporate card, right? The tzibur doesn't pay for this. So I think, according to Rabbi Yoshia, is teaching an incredible yesod, that in general, the way people work is that, how do you know when you're really vested in something? How do you know when you're really vested in something? When you pay for it. When you are financially vested, we'll say, think about this in life. The things that we are most vested in life are not dafka the things that we spend a lot of time on. They're the things we spend a lot of money on. Because at the end of the day, where you put your money really highlights where your priorities are and what's important to you. And I think what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was, according to Rabbi Yoshia, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Moshe Rabbeinu and telling Aaron HaKohen, you need to put your money in the Mishkan. You need to put your money in the Klal, because you're going to set an example for Klal Yisrael that when something is important enough for you, it becomes a financial priority. So it's an incredible yesod. It's not a money issue. It's amazing. There was plenty of money. It's not too often that Jewish organizations can make statements like that. There was plenty of money. I will say, in the Mishkan, in the desert, Baruch Hashem, there was plenty of money, right? Remember, no expenses. They had the mun, they had the be'er, their clothing was what's the word? Dry cleaned and right and grew with them. There were mamish, no expenses. They had all of the riches of Egypt. But Rabbi Yoshia says, Torah is teaching us an incredible idea. A lot of times we talk about things that are important to us, but if you mamish want to see what's important to a person, look where they put their money. And Moshe Rabbeinu, you got to make the chatzos roast yourself. Aaron HaKohen, you got to buy the karbanos yourself, because you're going to show the people that the Mishkan is a financial priority. And if the Mishkan is a financial priority, that means that it occupies a central place in your life. Klal Yisrael is a central priority. How do I know? Because I'm investing my money in Klal Yisrael. Incredible Yisod. Rabbi Yochanan says, Ben kach lecha, ben v'yikchu elecha, mishal tzibur. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. And Rabbi Yochanan holds that halacha l'maisa not true, right? There's no distinction. Rabbi Yochanan says the Torah sometimes just uses different wording, but whether it's kach lecha, yikchu elecha, it comes from the tzibur. There's no such thing as Aaron paying for his own karbanos, or no such thing as, well, again, we'll say, obviously, if Aaron's going to bring his own karbanos, that's of course something else. But anything that is part of the called choreographed sacrificial order of the Mishkan is going to come from communal funds. See, according to Rabbi Yoshia, I understand why the Torah uses different phrases for different things, right? Sometimes it'll say kach lecha, asay lecha, and v'yikroy lecha, because sometimes the leader has to pay for it himself, and sometimes it comes from communal funds. I understand. Rabbi Yochanan says there's no such distinction. Everything comes from communal funds. So why does the Torah use the possessive? So then why say v'yikroy lecha if you don't mean it? Why say asay lecha if it's not true? What's the pshat? This is incredible. Kiviyachol, so it's as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu was saying, sometimes to Moshe, sometimes to Aaron, Mishalcha ani rotze Yosef mishalahem. So I will say this is very interesting. According to Rabbi Yochanan, sometimes when the Ribono Shel Olam gets upset with Klal Yisrael, he says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you know what? I only want your offering. I don't want anything from them. So it's more an expression, according to Rabbi Yochanan, of divine displeasure. So when you say the Yikchu Elecha, those were moments when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was happy with the Klal. But when you see Asay Lecha, or Asay Lecha, or what was the other one? Kach Lecha, that was HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kiviyachal expressing his displeasure with the Klal. I don't want their money. I don't want their money. I'm unhappy with them. I don't want to. I love you. I love you. So you do. You serve. You work. I'll take from you. I don't want to take from them. Take a look. Take a look for a moment at the top Rashi. Kiviyachal ani shamati. So Rashi says, Im haya tzibor yachal lis kaper b'shal yachid hayisi rotze v'ani omer lefisha davar kashu lomer shakadosh baruch hu katz b'Yisrael. Omer kiviyachal koloma al karchinu yomar kain kilu efshar lomar kain v'chein v'chol kiviyachal shebe'ashas. So again, so Rashi explains over here is kiviyachal, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying in a state of displeasure or divine anger, I'm disappointed in them. So we'll say, sometimes when you have a falling out with someone and they give you something, you're like, no, thank you. It's okay. It's okay. I appreciate it, but I'd rather not have that from you. So Havdil, sometimes when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets upset with Klal Yisrael, he says, Moshe, I'll take it from you. Aaron, I'll take it from you, but I don't want it from the Klal. Abba Chana Armishur Rabbi Elazar, Kasav Echad Omer, Va'asisa Lecha Aronetz, the Kasav Echad Omer, Va'asu Aronetz Eshitim. So I will say, sometimes you actually have these two Lashonos in one context. For example, by the Aron, right? By the creation of the ark. So the Torah says, first pasuk says, Va'asisa Lecha Aronetz. God talking to Moshe, make for yourself an ark. And then it says, Va'asu Aronetz Eshitim. They will make an ark. So which one is it? Is it Moshe or is it Klal Yisrael? HaKetzad, here we go. Bizman she'Yisrael osin ritzono shel makom kan bizman she'ein osin ritzono shel makom. So we'll say we see this discussion. In other words, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, at times when you are doing my will, so I'm so happy to receive everything from you. That's asu aronas eshitim. But at times when you are not following my will, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, it's okay, keep your money. I'll take the Aron from Moshe, which I will say is something really, really incredible. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to us is at the end of the day, the things we give are meaningful, ultimately, again, where they're accompanied by a true allegiance and fidelity to the Ribono Shel Olam. But if at the end of the day I'm giving of my money, but I'm not giving of my heart, I'm not giving of my soul to the Ribono Shel Olam, to a certain degree, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, it's okay, I don't need it. An incredible yisod. So the Gemara says, Ad kan lo pligi ela bikichos da'alma, vasios da'alma. So the Gemara says, really, Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yochanan are not arguing when you see a stam kicha or a stam asiya. We'll see what that means in just a moment. The Gemara says, for example, kichos da'alma. So we'll say when it says kichos da'alma, kach lecha samim, asiyos da'alma, asay lecha shtei chatzos ros kesef. Aval hanach perushe kamefarish de mishalchahu. So we'll say this is very interesting. So the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Oshia is in certain situations where you have kach lecha, asay lecha, but the Gemara now posits there are certain circumstances where everyone will agree that the particular offering in question had to come from private funds. What are examples of that? Examples I will say are Yom Kippur and the Miluim. Yom Kippur and the Miluim, that both by Yom Kippur and the Miluim, everyone agrees that it had to come from private funds. That the karbanos of Aaron, the Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippur, came from his own money. That the karbanos of the Miluim ultimately again came from, Aaron, the Kohen Gadol's own money. So the Gemara says, listen to this, because Hanach, Yom Kippur, Miluim, Parushe Kamefarish to Mishalchahu. As we both say, by Miluim and Yom Kippur, the pasuk is explicit that it comes from the Kohen's own money. So the Gemara says, where do we see this? The Gemara says, "B'miluim michtei ksiv aval b'nei Yisrael tedaber aleimor kichu sirizim lechatos." Because by Miluim, what does it say? Speak to the Jewish people, tell them to take a seir izim as a chatos, and then it says, "Vayomer al Aaron kach lecha egel ben bakar lechatos." Then the pasuk says, and tell Aaron, take for yourself an egel ben bakar, a calf, as a chatos. So the Gemara says, "Lamali shmamina kach lecha mishalchahu." See, Rabbi say, what's interesting about this is as follows: that halacha l'maisa, the Gemara suggests the fact that you see a contrast over here. You see HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving one instruction to Klal Yisrael and another instruction ultimately again to Aaron HaKohen. And when that is phrased to Aaron HaKohen, the pasuk that's used, the phrase that's used is kach lecha. Everyone agrees that by the Miluim there was the communal offering and there was the personal offering. And Aaron's personal offering had to come from his own money. And the Gemara is positing now that everyone agrees with this concept. I will say, by the way, it also works very beautifully. Remember, what does Rashi comment on this pasuk of Kach Lecha Egel Ben Bakar, Lechatos, right? So remember, not Rashi, but Rashi and Chumash. Rashi and Chumash says, why Egel Ben Bakar? Lechaper, al maise egel azar, lechaper al chatas egel. Right? That interestingly enough, this personal offering of Aaron was there as an atonement, ultimately for Aaron's participation and to a certain degree enabling of the sin of the golden calf. So if you go with this idea, then halacha l'maisa, it's Aaron's carbon, and it comes from Aaron's money. So the Gemara is suggesting everyone agrees with that. So the Gemara says, for example, Yom Kippurim, what about in Yom Kippur? Everyone also agrees that the carbon comes from the Kohen's personal funds, because that's why by Yom Kippur what happens? Michtei ksiv ubezos yavo Aaron ala kodesh befar ben bakar lechatos. So the pasuk says, with this, Aaron will come to the kodesh, will come to the kodesh, befar ben bakar lechatos, with a cow for a chatos. And then it says, Ume'eis adas b'nei Yisrael, yikach shnei si'irei izim lechatos, v'ikr ves parachatas asher. So we'll say, then the pasuk says, and from b'nei Yisrael, you'll take two goats for chatos. And then the pasuk says, v'hikriv es parachatas asher lo. He will offer the parachatas which is his. So the Gemara says, Lamali, why do I need that phrase? You already told me about the parachatas of the Kohen. Why do you have to add in there that Aaron will offer up the chatas that is his? Why do you need that? Shmamina, hailo mishalohu. Because once again, Abosai, that additional possessive phrase, asher lo, comes to teach me that what? That halacha l'maisa, the par must come from Aaron's own funds. So we'll say, what comes out of here is something very interesting. So the Gemara introduces us, first of all, we'll say, it's really quite riveting, the machlokes Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yochanan. Sorry, Rabbi Yona's son. So what's that machlokes? Whenever you see the phrases, kach lecha, asay lecha, v'yikchu elecha, are those phrases specific or not? To which Rabbi Yoshia will say, yes, kach lecha, asay lecha, means it's coming from your own money. Whoever is being commanded, it's coming from your own personal funds. Right? V'yikhu elecha, communal funds. Rabbi Yona's son, not true. Not true. Whenever something happens in a communal setting, it's always coming from communal funds. What does Rabbi Yona's son then do with the lashonos of kach lecha, asay lecha? he says that's to express a more deeper sentiment by the Ibn Shalom. Sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes upset with us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to the Manig, he says to the leader, to the Moshe, to Aaron, I'm so upset at Klal Yisrael. I don't want anything from them. I don't want anything from them. Halavai, I should just have you serving me. I'm displeased with them, so I don't want their karbanos. I don't want their aron. It's more an expression, ultimately, again, of divine disfavor, divine displeasure, than anything else. Interestingly enough, however, the follow-up to that machlokes is everyone will agree in two cases, in two situations, that the karbanos come from the personal pocket of the person offering it. What are the two examples? The two examples, Miluim and Yom Kippur. Everyone agrees apparently that by the inauguration and by the service of Yom Kippur, by the inauguration by the Miluim, the particular karbanos, the unique karbanos that were offered up came from Aaron's pocket, the Kohen Gadol's pocket, and by Yom Kippur, the unique karbanos for the Kohen Gadol ultimately come from his pocket as well. Interestingly enough. So we'll say, now back to our discussion. Rav Ashi Amar, Donin par lechatas v'ayah le'olah, mi par lechatas v'ayah le'olah. So we'll say, so now again, remember, we're back to the pasuk. We're still trying to figure out what else can you include in the paradigm of hafrasha, of sequestering. So we're still up to Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why you can't go ahead and include Rosh Hashanah. Because Rabbi say, remember, in order to be included in the paradigm of Miluim, you have to resemble Miluim. Miluim had a par for chatos and an ayel for ola. Yom Kippur has the same thing. Lafuke Rosh Hashanah HaAtzeres ditarvayu olos ninu. This comes to exclude Rosh Hashanah and Shavuos, which Rabbi say don't have a par for chatas and an ayel for ola, but rather have two olos. Ravina says, done in avoda b'kohen gadol me avoda b'kohen gadol. Remember, we learn out from the paradigmatic example of Miluim. Miluim was done, right? The avoda was done by the kohen gadol. So too for sequestering, we learn out other avodos done by the kohen gadol. For example, Yom Kippur, lafuke kulon kushyasan delav avoda b'kohen gadol minhu. Wow, Rabbi say that just destroyed everything in one fell swoop. Do you want to know why we can't include anything else? Why all the other examples don't work? Because Rabbi say on all the other examples, the avoda is not unique to the kohen gadol, right? And Rosh Hashanah doesn't have to be the kohen gadol. Sukkot doesn't have to be the kohen gadol. Shavuos doesn't have to be the kohen gadol. The only two times that you needed the kohen gadol were where? Were ultimately Miluim and Yom Kippur. So therefore, if Miluim is going to serve as a paradigmatic example for the concept of sequestering, then it must resemble Miluim. Just like Miluim, the avoda can only be done by the Kohen Gadol, so to the only other circumstances in which we will have a din of sequestering is where the avoda could only be done by the Kohen Gadol. Ve'ikadamir, both say others have a different approach. Ikadamir, Amar Ravina, done in avoda tchila me avoda tchila. So this is very interesting. We go ahead and we learn out a first avoda from a first avoda. In other words, just like Miluim was a first avoda, the first time the avoda was done, so too the only other time you have a din of sequestering is also when something is a first. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. So the Gemara says, actually not yet, I'm sorry. My tchila, so what does that mean, a first? If you want to say it's first and that it can only be done by the Kohen Gadol, then ultimately, again, I will say, because remember, think about this just a moment. Miluim was the first time the Kohen Gadol went ahead and did the avoda, right? Yom Kippur is the first time the Kohen Gadol could go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. If that's what you mean, then Hainu Kamaisa. That's the same thing as you just said before, right? You just said before that the unique link between Miluim and Yom Kippur is that their avoda is done by the Kohen Gadol. Ella, rather, what it means is avoda tchila b'makom me avoda tchila b'makom. Rather, also, what you have to say is we learn out from Miluim, just like Miluim was the first time that the avoda was done in a particular place. What was the particular place? The Mishkan. So too, again, the paradigm says that also any other avoda which is done in a particular place for the first time, ultimately, again, also has a din of sequestering. What's pretty much the only other example of an avoda done in a particular place for the first time? Yom Kippur. Because what does that mean? What does it mean done in a place for a first time? The Kodesh HaKadoshim, right? There's no other time that the Kohen Gadol goes into the Holy of Holies in the Kodesh HaKadoshim except for Yom Kippur. Incredible. Kiel Rabdimi Am Rabbi Yochanan Masni Chada, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Masni Tardi. So it's very interesting. So when Rabdimi came along, he said, Rabbi Yochanan went ahead and taught one ruling, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi taught two rulings. What does this mean? Here we go. Rabbi Yochanan Masni Chada La Sos Lechaper Elu Ma'aseh Yom Kippurim. So we'll say, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi, now we're coming full circle again, right? So we have the pasuk from Miluim. Everyone's agreeing that Miluim is the paradigmatic example of sequestering. Rabbi Yochanan says, we only learn out one thing from Miluim. What's the one thing we learn from Miluim? One thing? Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, just like Miluim had 7 days of sequestering for 1 day of avoda, so too Yom Kippur has 7 days of sequestering for 1 day of avoda. Rabbi Shimon Levi says, Masni Tarti. He learns out two things. La'asos, Elu Ma'aseh, Lechaper, Elu Mas Yom Kippurim. And Rabbi Shimon Levi says, no, we learn out two things. From the word La'asos, we learn out Para Duma. That for 7 days before doing the avodah of the Para, you sequester. And ultimately, again, Lechaper, that refers to Yom Kippur. So we'll say Machlokes now, how to darshan the pasuk. Rabbi Yochanan doesn't learn out Paraduma. Rabbi Yochanan just learns out Yom Kippur, whereas Rabbi Yeshua Levi learns out both Paraduma and Yom Kippur. So we'll say, watch this. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan, Masni Chada, we'll say first wide line, Gimel Amud Beis. Rabbi Yochanan, Masni Chada, V'hanan Tanan Shiva Yom Kod Yom Kippurim, V'Shivas Yom Kod Yom Sapara. So the Gemara says, well, 1 second. Rabbi Yochanan only learns out, it's very exciting, Rabbi Yochanan only learns out Yom Kippur from the pasuk of Miluim. Here's the parable. So what's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem? I have a Mishnah. And what does the Mishnah say? 7 days before Para Aduma, the Kohen is sequestered. So where are you learning that concept out from? I will say again, when Rabbi Yochanan darshans the pasuk of Miluim, La'asos lechaper, he only sees in that Yom Kippur. He doesn't see any reference to Para Aduma. Fine. But the problem is, the Mishnah tells us that there is sequestering that is done prior to the avoda of Para Aduma. So Rabbi Yochanan, where do you learn that out from? So we'll say this is actually quite wild. To which Rabbi Yochanan responds, Ma'ale ba'alma. Ma'ale ba'alma. Well, so what does Ma'ale ba'alma mean? It's just a chumrah that they imposed by Para Aduma. There's actually no halachic obligation of hafrasha, of sequestering, prior to the performance of the Para. It's just a churma. Take a look at Rashi. Ma'ale ba'alma mipnei akal shekilu ba'latami midas hakohen asarfa asuba ma'ale sarva. So Rabbi Yochanan will say this. It's about yesterday's daf. We'll say, remember again, who offered Para Aduma? Who offered Para Aduma? Kohen could do it, but what was the Kohen's ritual purity? This yesterday. What was the Kohen's ritual purity state? Tvul Yom. Tvul Yom. So remember again, we do that. Why? Why it's Tvul Yom? Excellent. So I'll say, so what you see in halacha is something dramatic. On one hand, we're going to employ a ridiculous kula. We're going to be actively be metame a kohen. That's what we're doing. We're going to actively make a kohen tameh in order to show the tzdukim that they're wrong. That kohen is then going to go to the mikvah. He's going to do the avodah while he's at Tvul Yom. But what's the concern with this approach? The concern with this approach is that people are going to adopt a general laxity towards Para Aduma. So how do we counteract that? By employing a number of other chumras. For example, chumrah number 1 is we only use what kinds of utensils? Right? Dung, stone, earth. Right? Clay avonim, clay gelalim, clay adama, kilim are not makabel tumah. Rabbi Yochanan will pass by another chumrah is we sequester the coin for 7 days. But Rabbi Yochanan will say it's not a biblical obligation. It's not learned that from Miluim, but rather, again, it's just simply a maila. It's just simply a chumrah in order that people should not come to treat Para Aduma laxly. So the Gemara goes, right, V'ha'amar Rab Minyumi, Bar Chilki, Amar Rab Mechasya Bar Idi, Amar Rab Yochanan, Kasher Asa V'yom Hazeh, Tziva Hashem Lasos, L'chapra Alechem, Lasos Elu Ma'aseh Para, L'chaper Elu Ma'aseh Yom Kippurim. Yet Rabbi said this is incredible. But yet Rabbi Yochanan himself is on record as quoting this pasuk by Miluim and as quoting the phrase Lasos to refer to Para Aduma. So what's going on over here, Rabbi? Say, what is going on over here? Right? At the end, Rabbi Yochanan just said, no. The only thing we learn out from the Miluim is Yom Kippur. Lasos the Chaper refers to Yom Kippur. And now Rabbi Yochanan is being quiet. And by the way, what about sequestering before Para Aduma? Ma'ale ba'alma. It's just a chumrah. Now Rabbi Yochanan is being quoted as darshaning Lechaper refers to Yom Kippur. Lasos refers to Para Aduma, which seems to indicate to us that the obligation for sequestering for prior to Para Aduma is a biblical obligation. So Rabbi Yochanan, which one is it? To which the Gemara says, Hahud Rabbe. No. Rabbi Yochanan is quoting two opinions. One is his own opinion, one is his Rebbe's opinion. Rabbi Yochanan's own opinion is The only obligation for sequestering was by the Miluim, and from the Miluim we learn out Yom Kippur. There is no obligation to sequester by Para Aduma, and the only reason we do it is a chumrah for Para Aduma, so that people shouldn't be lax with Para Aduma. Rabbi Yochanan's Rebbe held that no, just like Yom Kippur is learned out from Miluim, so too Para Aduma is learned out from Miluim as well. Techi Asa Rabin, Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Yishmael, because when Rabin came along, Rabbi Yochanan said the name of Rabbi Yishmael is Rabbi. Lasos, Elu Maise Para, therefore it's the Para Aduma, Lechaper, Elu Maase Yom Kippurim. And Lechaper ultimately again refers to Yom Kippur. So Rabbi say, turns out that Rabbi Yochanan is actually not contradicting himself, rather Rabbi Yochanan is espousing two opinions. His own opinion, right? His own opinion, and ultimately, again, the opinion of his Rebbe. Now, boss, you're thinking to yourself, but 1 second, how could a Talmud have a different opinion than his Rebbe? Because again, boss, remember again, it's a Talmud's obligation to go ahead and learn from his Rebbe, but nothing stops the Talmud from espousing his own ideas, as long as those own ideas ultimately, again, are rooted in something like boss, the Belzer Rebbe. Tzidkas Hatzaddik says something so truly beautiful on the pasuk in the Shira, Zeh Keli va'anvehu. This is my God, and I will exalt him. Elokei avi va'arom menhu, the God of my father, and I will lift him up. So the Rebbe says so beautifully that there are two relationships with the Ribono Shel Olam. There's Elokei avi, the God of my father, and there's Zeh Keli, my God. Each of us have two different relationships with the Ribono Shel Olam. There's an inherited relationship. Hopefully my parents instilled within me a proper ideology, a proper hashkafa. There's a certain Judaic identity that is instilled in me from the previous generation. That's Elokei Avi, that's the God of my father. But I also have an obligation of Zeh Keli, to create my own relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. It's not just, I don't just have inherited Yiddishkeit, I don't just have an inherited relationship. That's incredibly important, and that's the foundation. But what really makes me, me, is my Zeh Keli. What's my relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam? What's my identity? Who am I as a Jew? What's the neshama that I'm going to cultivate? So Rabbi Yochanan says, my Rebbe says this, but I cultivated a different opinion. Incredible. So the Gemara says, here, both of the Gemara is just quoting over here, this is more explicit. This is Rabbi Yochanan quoting in the name of Rabbi Yishmael is Rabbi. Amar li Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, mehecha kayalfisla. So Reish Lakish says to Rabbi Yochanan, tell me, where did you learn this out from? Right? Where did you learn this out? So you know what? Actually, let's do one more line. So Reish Lakish says to Rabbi Yochanan, tell me. So remember again. So now what we have is Rabbi Yochanan himself saying that halacha l'maisa, the only thing we learn out from the Miluim is Yom Kippur. Right? Paraduma is not learned out from Miluim. Ultimately, Paraduma is a chumrah. But yet, Rabbi Yochanan quotes his Rabbi Yishmael as saying, no, both Paraduma as well as Yom Kippur learned that from Miluim. We'll stop here. Will the Mir Hashem pick up with this Techi Asa Ravin or Amar Li Yishlag Rabbi Yochanan Mir Hashem tomorrow and finish out this sugi tomorrow. Shkar Chabosai.